And on the Ukraine, obviously Ukraine wasn't necessarily on your flight path. And so rather than dealing with that, you may want to give your assessment of the situation in Ukraine. But also you called for the lifting of Jackson Vanik for Moldova. How about Russia?
I believe that Jackson Vanik obviously doesn't apply in the 21st century in many respects. But I also believe that there are certain standards that the Russians have not adhered to that would make them eligible, in my view, to the WTO. I believe that there's very little doubt that there has been a centralization of power, repression of the media, and that the reset has not succeeded. And this myth that we clung to for too long, that Medvedev had any real power in Russia, has finally been largely dispelled, at least in the minds of most of us. I think the Khodorkovsky issue highlighted the really breakdown of the rule of law in Russia. Vladimir Putin said, I believe he should sit in jail. And we now hear from the assistant prosecutor that all of his trial was orchestrated from Moscow, indicates that there's certainly a severe lack of the protections of rule of law for Russian citizens.
Thank you. I see one question here, please, and then in the row behind. There we go.
From the German daily Der Tagesspiegel. Nice to see you, Radek, here again, and Senator McCain. I want to ask a question, and of course it's different context, what we see at the moment in North Africa, what we saw end of the 80s in Central Eastern Europe, what we see today in this country. But nevertheless, I can't help to think a little about it. We are celebrating here the big success of solidarity, a trade union. In this country, we have a discussion how to limit bargaining rights of a trade union. We are talking about that these countries need the help, foreign aid, that they need broadcasting. In this country, we have a discussion how to limit the expenses for public broadcasting, for foreign aid. And we have talked about that in Halifax, so I know more or less where you stand. It's not an aggressive or unfriendly question to you, Senator McCain, but I would be interested in your comments. And Radek, I know you're in a difficult position. You shouldn't comment as a foreign minister, but maybe you have also your thoughts, how that all fits together, that we can be examples in Europe and the United States, how to deal with this difficult questions. And I know it's a different context, but nevertheless, it's symbolic a little.
Consider that one, I think, for you, Senator McCain.
I don't think there's any doubt that the message from the November 2nd election was that the American people want us to cut excessive spending and even reduce the size of government, which, by the way, has doubled. The size of government has doubled since 1999. And we have to absolutely respond to the message of the voters, because most Americans realize that we cannot continue on the path that we're on. And by the way, addressing entitlements is going to have to be done sooner or later. And some of us are going to have to step forward and propose specific reforms to entitlements, because as you know, we're only looking at 12% of the spending now and trying to make those cuts. We have to make a case to the American people, who largely voted in the November 2nd election on one issue, and that was the economy. We have to convince the American people, and I believe we can, that it is in America's national security interest, not Tunisia's, not Libya, not Egypt's, but in America's national security interest to help these countries through this very tenuous time. And I believe I have no embarrassment of going back to Arizona this weekend and saying we're gonna have to find ways to help them. Otherwise, you will see a violent form of extremism take over in some of these countries, which would be a direct threat to America's national security.
Well, actually, there is a tradition of it. If you remember, Lady Thatcher in Britain. She supported solidarity, but at the same time resisted trade unions at home that were too that were resisting change in the coal industry, for example. There is nothing sacred, and all institutions can become obstacles to modernity. Trade unions are not exempt. I think in Tunisia, for example, they can play a very positive role. They are an element of civil society. But in our transformations, we had examples of trade unions working to save their businesses, and also trade unions making decisions which led to the collapse of some businesses. You have trade unions. I wouldn't dare comment on the situation here, but trade unions can be reasonable or unreasonable, just like anybody else.
Let me just remind you, trade unions didn't do these all by themselves. It was negotiations with elected officials. Maybe this may sound strange, but maybe we ought to put some of the responsibility on the elected officials that negotiated these contracts, which obviously are breaking the economies of states, towns, cities, and to some degree the federal government.
We're running out of time. I see lots of questions, but let me just take the one right here with her hand in the air, please. Should we take two? Yeah. Okay,
Hi,
great.
Dinar Ersoy from Turkish Daily Milliyet. Senator McCain, you've encouraged the transatlantic community to take specific steps in regards to Middle East. What would Turkey's specific role be in this process?
Okay, let's take.
I think Turkey obviously can play a key and vital role. They are playing a role in the region and emerging as a great power in the region. But I have to add, I am a little concerned about some of the recent actions of the Turkish government, particularly where freedom of the press is concerned.
Okay, at the behest of Senator McCain, we're going to have one more question here, please. Thank you. In fact, why don't we take you two right there, and we'll have very quick answers to both.
My name is Walter Jurasek. My question to you is, United Nations reports recently say that human rights by Libya was quite good, and now it's changing rapidly. It says it's not good. So let me ask you, what United Nations is pro-democracy, or they just play the games with whatever is the wind is flow? Is this?
It's a good question. One last question. No, right here. Yes, thank you.
I was never impressed with a Human Rights Commission composed of Cuba, Libya, and Iran to start with, but the United Nations reminds me of the old joke about the two guys in a small town that on Saturday night, and the guy says, "What are you doing tonight?" He says, "I'm going to the poker game." And the guy said, "Why do you want to do that? You know that game is crooked." And he said, "It's the only game."
Minister Sikorski,
well, Libya is sitting on the Human Rights Commission. How can you improve on that? Saudi Arabia on religious freedom, North Korea on nuclear disarmament.